Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. Happy Women's History Month. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing this hour with us. Really excited to have Sheila Katz and Laura Monn Ginsberg here from NCJW, and we'll do some intros briefly. Just while we're getting started, if you can either put in the chat your name, your organization, your role, and where you're calling in from, just so we can see who's here. And I'll start as an example: Seth Linden, Gather Consulting, Long Beach, California, because we got a lot of folks from a lot of different parts of the country. We got professionals, we got board members here, consultants, funders. So it's really nice to see everyone. And I'll take actually a minute just for folks to start putting those in so we can say our hellos. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Naomi, Dana, Madeline, Ellen, Marla Beth. Awesome. So I also want to just start with a moment of silence for all the horrific violence and the lives lost in Israel and Gaza. And yeah, so I just want to take a moment of silence for that. Okay. It's great to be with you all. It's great to see familiar faces. For those who don't know me, for those who are new, I'm Seth Linden. I'm the founder and principal of Gather Consulting. My other hats include I'm the board member of Jewish Studio Project, a board member of Jewish Long Beach, the father of two boys, a husband, friend, brother, coach, artist, and community builder. And for those who are new, BoardTalk is a space to share ideas and resources around nonprofit governance and to connect with and learn from other board members. We've been doing this since 2020, since COVID, and we relaunched a few months ago after October 7th. I think what I say on every call is that I believe boards have a responsibility to step up now, as they do always. Boards are, in my mind, a staple of community. They are a staple of democracy. Boards are their own communities and their own cohorts of learners and leaders. All right, Erica, JSP Cohort 3 Creative Facilitator. And we need them more now than ever. So I really appreciate those showing up now and more importantly, showing up on your boards and for your organization. So as I'm sure we all know, in a crisis, there is both danger and opportunity. And so I really want to lean into the opportunity here. And I also, for those who are new, just want to remind folks, this is not education and advocacy for Israel-Palestine. What this is education and advocacy for effective governance, for good decision-making, for strong leadership models, policies, and values. So I just wanted to share all of that. Again, for those who are new, what we like to do actually before anything else, before we get into the conversation, is just do a quick breakout with someone else on the call. And I'm going to take you up just into pairs. So
they're doing breakouts. Oh my God.
Madeline, yeah, thank you. So if you don't want to go in a breakout, you don't have to, but this is a nice way to just meet someone else who you may not know. There's no prompt other than these two questions. Thanks, Erica. How are you doing as a human, and how are you doing as a nonprofit leader? You can introduce yourself, say hi, why you're here, etc. So I'm going to do this really quick. There's 16 of us, so we're going to do 8 breakout rooms. We're going to assign automatically. And I'm going to give you all 5 minutes, chat, meet someone new, and come on back. All right. So I'll see you in 5. There we go. Welcome back. Awesome. hope you had good conversations. I always love those things. I always love the opportunity to just meet someone new. So hope you met someone new in that breakout. I'm gonna pin our two special guests right now. And I'm really excited to chat with Laura and with Sheila. I'm going to give them brief bios, and then we'll just get right in. So Sheila is the CEO of NCJW, the National Council of Jewish Women. I met her when she was an executive at Hillel International when I was a program officer at the Jim Joseph Foundation about 5+ years ago. Was always just incredibly impressed with your leadership skills, your poise, your just the way you think outside the box, your nuance, and your empathy for all the work and the people and everything that you do. And I'm honored that you're here today, especially on this first day of Women's History Month. So thank you, Sheila, for being here. Laura is the board chair of NCJW, and she was formerly the board chair of NCJW in Minneapolis or Minnesota. And it's really nice to meet you, Laura, and to have you here. And it sounds the little that we've chatted sounds like the two of you have an incredible partnership and relationship, and I'm really excited to explore that and for you to share the magic of that with folks here. So yeah, we're lucky to be in community and conversation with you today. I'm gonna continue to invite folks in. So Sheila, let's just start with you if it's cool. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about NCJW, what it's been like the past few months for you as CEO, and anything else that you just want to start off with?
Sure. Thanks so much, Seth. And what he said about me, I feel like right back at Seth. We go way back from my Hillel days, but I've always really appreciated your empathy and curiosity and the way you approach your work. It's wonderful to be here with Laura, my partner in justice, and I got to give a shout out to my predecessor, Nancy Kaufman, who's here, who was also a mentor of mine when I was at Hillel. So we've been on a long journey together, and so many friends and board members of NCJW and folks in the room. So National Council of Jewish Women is 130 years old. You can all come celebrate us on March 12th in Washington, D.C. if you're around. I have a big party. And it's important, I think, in the context of this conversation, because we're the oldest Jewish women's organization in the country. We were founded when women went to the Chicago World Fair and wanted to present, and the men told them to pour coffee instead. And then the slightly longer version is that they went to the women's organizations and they said no Jews. And so NCJW was founded to make sure Jewish women had a seat at the table for the issues that matter to us. Our work has always been guided by Jewish values, and Jewish values tell us to make the world better for everyone, not only for Jews. And so our work, legislatively has included writing the Violence Against Women Act, passing pretty much every major piece of civil rights legislation in this country. And our work in Israel started when children Holocaust survivors showed up and no one knew what to do with them. And we had experience at Ellis Island working with children coming here. So we've been on a long, 130-year journey as an organization. And the last few months have been really, really hard. And I can't say the hardest ever when you think about everything the organization has ever gone through. Certainly the hardest in my almost 5 years in this role. Not only was there the largest mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust on October 7th, but then a war accompanying that in Gaza that disproportionately has children as civilians. And on top of that, reproductive rights continue to roll back. We've seen legislation just as early as a week ago, right, banning IVF pretty much in Alabama. And there's a child care crisis in this country, 50% of families with no access to child care. And so all of our issues feel like a crisis moment. Not only the issues that the Jewish community sometimes likes to talk about, but all of the issues impacting women, children, and families. And so it's been an exhaustive few months, and I've also never been prouder of our moral voice and the work that we've been doing. So there's a lot to say about how the board helps make it so that we can do that and the relationship we have, but I'm proud to be here again with Laura and with so many of you, and we can dive deep into any of those things even more.
Thanks, Sheila. Appreciate that. And yeah, Laura, it'd be great to just hear a little bit from you about, as board chair, what the last few months have been like for you and NCJW.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Really excited to be here. Obviously, always excited to be somewhere with Sheila. As I was saying to Madeline when we were catching up at the beginning in our breakout, it kind of always feels like we're governing in crisis to be in a Jewish space. So in some ways, it's oddly business as usual with a slightly different, tenor. And it definitely is not what I expected. I started my 3-year board term July 1st. So this has been a very exciting start. But you know the saying about if you want something done, ask a busy woman to do it. And I think that has some similar tentacles into when there's crises to manage, when there's multiple things happening, when there's many places to be and show up. I think that is something that certainly Jewish women do well, and that NCJW does exceptionally well. Both staff and board have been ready and willing to do anything and be everywhere, and that's been really special. So it's definitely been off to a bit of a frenetic start, but there's still so much joy and so much to celebrate in all that is hard and difficult and is haunting us daily. So trying to hold all of that at once is a special privilege.
I appreciate that, Laura. Yeah, I mean, let's dive into a little bit. Can you share just from your experience over the last few months, and maybe Sheila, go back to you, like what has your board done that was particularly helpful kind of in the wake of October 7th as a most recent crisis or any crisis? We've been through a few recently. Can you share a story or two or example or two of how your board showed up?
I mean, I can't think of a way in which they didn't. I think one of the things that I find, or I'll put it this way, I talk to a lot of my peers, my CEO friends, and it makes me feel extra privileged for the board that because there's a lot of trust and flexibility. I think since we're used to navigating in crisis, there's an understanding that sometimes decisions have to be made fast. In these moments. Like, as an example, we don't traditionally take out statements on Shabbat. We never really have, with the exception of when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And we were the first Jewish organization to take a statement on October 7th. And part of it is like, we know that it's okay to do those kinds of things in these moments. We know it's okay to lead in crisis. And we know we've already had some of the difficult conversations around a lot of the kinds of potential issues, whether it be in Israel, in the United States, that warrant speaking out in moments where we might not normally, whether it's because it's Shabbat or whether because it's slightly out of the scope of what we might normally cover. And so I actually think in the same way, anyone who facilitates a conversation know that you have an easier time navigating the hard moments if you've set ground rules beforehand that you can lean back on. I think so much of the pre-work we've done together and the trust that has been built has allowed us to just lean in these kinds of moments. And fail fast, right? Like, nobody got all the messaging right away around the crisis because it was unfolding in real time. There was a moment in which we realized, of course, we were talking about the hostages. Of course, we were talking about what happened on October 7th. Of course, we were talking about sexual assault and sexual violence. And there was a moment a board member was like, we haven't actually talked about what this is like for Palestinian women and Palestinian children. And we have to zoom out and look at how that is woven in to our talking points and our messaging. And we only can get there, not by planning in advance to say, we have to hit all of these check marks at all these different times, but by being a moral voice in the way we know how, and being open to the feedback as we're going about what needs to be added in, what needs to be adjusted, and things like that. So I'll turn it to Laura because I saw she unmuted, but I think the best of what we've been able to do, and we could talk about the UN event too, really happened as a result of having trust that when crises happens, the staff can just go and do, and we can pick up the phone with the board members that have the relevant skills for what's necessary. Not necessarily get the whole board together if it's too complicated, but get the right people in the right room with the trust that we're doing this in the best possible way for the organization.
Thanks,
Laura,
Sheila.
what do you think?
Yes, totally +1 to all of that. And in the fluffier side of things, as far as how the board has come through in times of crisis, I often say that NCJW is where I do Jewish. It is my home base. It is my starting point for how I put my own Jewish values into action. And it's really my shul is at NCJW. And after October 7th, we already had a board meeting in person scheduled to be in Washington, D.C. Starting October 14th, so a week after. And I remember my mom saying to me, I live in Minneapolis, by the way, and we have board members all over the country, and we fly in and come in for the meetings. And my mom said, are you still having your meeting? And I said, I can't imagine not having this meeting right now. There is nowhere I would rather be truly in this moment than at a board table, at my board table with my board colleagues and with my fabulous staff team that I get to work with that are in this with me. And that was the sentiment that I heard loud and clear from the rest of the board as well. I mean, nobody asked me if they should be rescheduling or not coming. Everybody was adamant about being there and getting the updates that we could get and finding out from Sheila and Jody, who's on, and the rest of the team, you know, where are we in the trenches? What can we be doing? And we've had board members that, you know, really felt empowered, certainly to show up there and be in conversation and dialogue and just to be with one another. And as Sheila alluded to, you know, we've had a UN event that I'll let her talk about, but, you know, we had board members that went to that. I couldn't go to that, but we had other board members that were like, yes, absolutely, I will be there. And they flew to New York to be there. We had board members helping to create social media graphics because we had, you know, some gaps that we had to fill in because we had staff that were working on other high priorities. And so it was like, okay, can anybody else do this? Yes, somebody has a ability to, you know, use those skills. Let's do it. So I've just been really, it makes me feel so good. And it's exactly what I expect because we just have such a fabulous caliber of person on our board. And it's just so incredible and heartwarming to see that all show up in the moment where folks want to be together. They want to comfort one another. They want to hear what others are thinking about and feeling and where they have personal ties to things. And they want to know how to act and advocate and be activated. And it's just, that level of energy is kind of irreplaceable. And so, yeah, I really see the board showing up immensely in those spaces. And then Sheila, I don't know if you want to talk about the UN event, because I think that was a gorgeous cross section of, you know, showing up and being in crisis and doing something worthy with it.
Yeah. And what I'd say is I totally forgot about like when Mary Elliott helped us with the graphics. Like when everything was happening on Shabbat, we have a lot of staff who keep Shabbat. And we don't ask our staff to work on Shabbat. And so we actually had like an interesting gap in the ability to like do some of the design work because our comms team keeps Shabbat. And you know, and I think it's a perfect example because in moments of crises, I think the lines between staff and board sometimes blur in a way that feels okay. Like it was a moment where we're like, this is what we need to happen. Who can help? And whereas normally I think the delineation between the role of the staff and the board is very important and clear and still is important and clear, I think in crisis moments, it's about what can you make happen as quickly as possible in a way that's unified and aligned, and how do you get the right people in the room to do it? And I like really, like Laura was designing graphics for us on October 7th to be able to get things out. I like actually forgot, like in the blur of everything. And so what a good point. And not that we should have to ask people to work on a day that they don't work, but that's how we were able to continue to move forward and not ask something of staff that wasn't appropriate to ask. The quick version of the UN event, as we think about responding to crisis, is when the UN women refused over and over and over again to acknowledge that sexual violence was used as a tool of war on October 7th. It became clear that there needed to be a way to present kind of the evidence from that day. It's so hard to get real news these days and to know what's real, what's not. And they weren't doing what they needed to. So we hosted a special session at the United Nations, brought in people from Israel, first responders, et cetera, to share factual evidence. And we basically said we were put on the special hearing that UN women should have put on, that they chose not to. And the event reached over 80 million people and changed the way that national news outlets reported on the 7th to start reporting what happened with sexual violence as fact instead of what happened allegedly. Now, that's at risk again for a variety of reasons, and we're going to look and examine to see what we might be able to do. That entire event and all of the planning took place in a week and a half. Like, we found out the ability to get that space. We jumped into action. I mean, Rebecca's on here. We had amazing partnership in our foundation professionals who we just called and said, we're doing this no matter what. We haven't figured out how to pay for it, but if anybody can give us an emergency grant, it would be great. And folks like the Schusterman Foundation and the Weinberg Foundation stepped up and helped make it happen. And then we had board members fly in, like Fran's on the call here. Fran was like from Florida. We had board members come and show support and offer to help, you know, get it all set up. And so it was just kind of one of those, we're doing this, and it grew big very quickly in a way we didn't fully expect. And it was all hands on deck. And so anyways, I'm proud that we were able to, it was a horrible thing to have to hear the testimony. And I'm really proud that we were able to do that and get that on the record in the halls of the United Nations.
Beautiful. Congrats, Sheila and Laura. And yeah, that's impressive. And I can't even wrap my head around all that. It sounds like maybe a question that I want to actually ask 2 more questions, and we'll open it up to the folks here in the Zoom room. You both mentioned how important this board is for you, Laura, how the staff and the board members just dive in, Sheila. It sounds like you have a great culture on your board. And I'm wondering if there are things you can share about how you've built that culture over time. What kind of practices, what kind of behaviors, what kind of policies do you have in place as a board that seems like things, I'm sure they don't always work well, but it seems like there's you've built a great culture, and I'm just curious if you can share how you did that.
Go ahead, Laura.
Sure, absolutely. Bye, Jody. Yeah, so this is definitely something that was really important to us. And you know, this is my dog, RBG, with the last name Ginsberg, spelled correctly. That's Arby, and she is leashed to me, so hopefully she will remain calm. But, you know, there might be a package delivery or something that interferes with her ability to be a normal mammal. Yeah, so building a board culture is really important to me. It is never far from my mind that board service is volunteer work, that it is something that people add to their list of things to do. And that for many of us, there are so many competing things in our lives, from families, professional work, our own communities, et cetera. So it's important to me that it feels good to serve on a board. And there are some things that we have done to enhance just overall diversity and the pool of great folks that we pull from. We don't have a minimum board gift, and that's something that we changed as a policy. And that's something that we felt really strongly about as we were thinking about different ways to bring folks in that have different time and talent to bring alongside treasure or willingness to help us find more treasure. You know, these are all things that you have to balance in a board, and it's something that I feel very strongly about when we're thinking about how we can bring folks into the fold. Coming up through National Council of Jewish Women here in Minnesota, one of the things that I remember talking about at a board meeting once was, how do each of the letters of NCJW connect with you? You know, what does it mean to be part of something that's national? What does it mean to be something that's part of a council, a collaboration, you know, have that cohesion? What does it mean that there's Jewish in the name, that there's women in the name? And, you know, Sheila gave you a little bit of kind of where that all came from, that it was sort of our first of many marks of defiance in some ways, to proudly wear that on our sleeve. And it's interesting to think about, okay, well, where does that, you know, shine a light as a beacon of a place where people can come, because they, you know, those things are explicit in our name. Those are the things that we want to, you know, champion, and those are the supporters among many others that we're looking for. And where does it potentially close us off? Where do folks maybe self-select because they don't feel like it's for them, or that they are, you know, warmly part of the table? And this is something that we've talked a lot about, you know, how might we signal that we're more open and willing and than it might appear at first blush? One of the things I love most about my work with NCJW, and something that I think often gets overlooked when we talk about, diversity and bringing diverse perspectives into a room, is age diversity. National Council of Jewish Women is such a unique space in that it brings together a continuum of women of all ages. And that is something that's been really special. When I chaired the board in Minnesota, we had 3 sets of mothers and daughters that were simultaneously serving on our board of directors. And I think that's just incredibly unique. I don't get that at any other board table that I sit at. So it's been fun to think about different ways that diversity comes into the room, certainly geographic diversity, the Jewish spectrum of how folks, might consider themselves Jewish or show up as Jewish. That is certainly something that we're never counting the receipts on, like whatever Jewish means to you, or as long as you connect with our mission, that's great. Nobody's ever going to give you a test, which was something that was very important to me because I did not grow up exceptionally Jewish. And when they asked me to be president here in Minnesota, I asked back if I was Jewish enough, to take on that mantle, to be president of something with Jewish in the name. And it was NCJW, it was those leaders who really said to me explicitly, if you're here, you're one of us. And that's all the bona fides we need. So it's a long way of answering some of your question here as far as board culture, but I think that acceptance and welcomingness is what really seeps into the board culture and helps us continue to attract folks that want to give it this level and this caliber and sometimes with this urgency.
Thanks, Laura. That's beautiful. Sheila, do you want to add? I want to open it up, but do you want to add anything in terms of, as the CEO, how do you encourage, strengthen, make sure that the culture stays healthy for your board?
Yeah, I mean, it always is going to ebb and flow, right? Right when you got something figured out, the pendulum's going to swing. So I think we just have to be flexible. I actually think there was a cohesion moment as a result of COVID, if I'm really honest. There was Laura's predecessor, Dana Gershon, started her journey as board president in COVID and basically ended it towards the end of COVID and didn't get all the glamour that lots of our presidents get to have and going to the White House all the time and things like that in the work that we do. Mostly everything was on Zoom all the time. But there was a real moment of opportunity in saying, how do we meet? When do we meet? How do we show up for each other as people? How do we build community that we were kind of forced to do online? But doing that, even like Laura and I were just in a meeting about an upcoming board meeting, and it was this great question of the difference of what we do when we're in person versus when we're online. And how we make people feel special, how we have certain experiences. At that board meeting the week after October 7th, we were like, what can we do that actually acknowledges us as human beings? And we're lucky to have such a good relationship with this administration. And Dr. Jill Biden, there was garden tours of the White House, and she just gave us tickets for all of our board members as the Jewish community has been going through a lot, come tour the gardens. And so we took a moment and we brought our board to the White House gardens and just walked around and looked at the rose garden and had a moment as people together. And I think we find a lot of value. It's not usually like that, always like that. But the last board meeting, we went to the Supreme Court as a group and we took a tour of the Supreme Court and we went into the, hearing room where all the decisions are made and we talked about it together. So we always try to either have best I could put it is a field trip that's in DC and something that's special and connected to our organization, or we bring in a speaker. One of our first board meetings after COVID, we went to the White House to meet with a second gentleman who, by the way, handles the gender portfolio at the White House, which is traditionally the second lady's work. And when he took over, he called the women's organizations and was like, I think I should still do it, even though I'm a man. I shouldn't make my wife do it because she's a woman. And so he's our main point of contact, both in a gender lens, and he's really owned his Jewishness. So we work very closely with Second Gentleman Emhoff. We went to meet with him, And actually, as a result of the meeting we had with him, is what led to the whole of government approach to combat anti-Semitism that Emhoff with Ambassador Lipstadt and others worked on. And so sometimes just bringing our very compelling, amazing board that's diverse, maybe not so much on gender, but on age and background, growing, diversity in race, LGBTQ representation. It really helps when you get together in rooms of people that are powerful and you can hear what people are concerned about. And for us, it's really important to use those moments to remind people that, yes, Jews are concerned about anti-Semitism. We are. Yes, we're concerned about Israel. We are. And we're also concerned about childcare, the growing rate of gun violence in schools, equal pay, paid family leave. Like, we get to actually remind everyone that traditionally the voices that are listened to, who predominantly in our community still remain men, are not only representing the full scope of issues that matter to Jews today. And so I just think some of the mix of seeing people as human beings who are there because they care about making our country better, having them there as Jewish individuals, and really trying to build a culture, a multi-generational culture on our board where people like each other and know each other. I don't know, it kind of feels delightful. And the only other thing I'll say, Seth, before we open it up is, because in a way this feels historic, Laura and I are both elder millennials. We're millennials, but, different classification on the older side. And we believe from what we've learned that we're the first duo at this age of any legacy organization. And so of a president and a CEO, both, in this age bracket. And to be honest, it's amazing that NCJW is giving people opportunities to lead at a variety of ages. Like, Laura didn't get picked because of her age, and I don't think I was picked as CEO because of my age. But the fact that we've done certain things to allow people to come in, both in changing that minimum gift and a variety of things, is allowing different types of leaders to show up and be able to lead in different ways. And I think any organization would be lucky to have Laura as their board president, but not all organizations are set up to have Laura as their board president. So lucky us. But I think we're starting to see the impact of a lot of decisions that have been made before me, when Nancy was there, when Dana and Beatrice beforehand, our board presidents. We're seeing the results of that right now in people attracted to our board, in people coming back to our board, in people, staying as long as possible, because we, like Fran, we never want you to leave, but we do have term limits, but to stay as long as possible in those term limits. So sometimes we don't get to see the results of some of those changes until a few years later, but it has been exciting to say, like, it's not traditional when Laura and I show up in spaces with major Jewish legacy organizations. We're both usually the other, if that makes sense. We don't look like everybody else who's there. We're not the same age as everybody else who's there. We're not the same gender as everyone else who's there. And it actually has given both of our voices more power in a lot of those spaces.
Awesome. Super impressive. Thank you both. I think culture, we sometimes, we don't, as a board member myself, we don't spend enough time in that relationship building with other board members, in those field trips, in those guest speakers. I wish we had, Jill Biden on speed dial as well to get tours to the White House. But it sounds like just bringing together your folks in person and, giving them some fun, giving them some food, giving them something different than the traditional board meeting is a good way to for healthy board culture. So there's a few questions already in the chat. Let me just lift up a few, and Laura and Sheila, you can just kind of pick and choose where you want to go. So one question just that was earlier that was just directed to me was, what are some of the specific challenges you faced since October 7th, specifically, maybe around different perspectives around board members? That was one question. There's a question here around, can you share briefly, how did you get to speak at the UN? And then from Rebecca, curious about how you think about gender diversity within NCJW's board and governance structure, given the mission and vision of the org. Feel free to take any one of those in any direction you want.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to jump in on the gender diversity one, since I was the one who kind of spoke about that and how it's absolutely part of our name and certainly a lot of where our mission focuses. It's a really interesting question. I do think a lot about gender diversity, and just to be super clear, anybody, regardless of any gender identification, is more than welcome to be a supporter. That means financially, certainly, always happy. Nobody's checking any boxes on that. But you know, we have many folks that show up alongside us when we're marching, when we're congregating, when we are taking action, when we're celebrating. And so, you know, we're certainly extremely open on that. Now, I won't lie that having the word women explicitly in the name of the organization was something that really appealed to me. I tell this story a lot, and this is a perfect elder millennial story. I found NCJW through Google. Unlike many folks that come to NCJW, I did not come through a relation, my mother, my grandmother, anything like that. I was looking to build my own Jewish community of women and folks that I wanted to spend some time with and that I wanted to do good with. And I Googled Minneapolis women Jewish volunteer. NCJW was what came up. I read the mission. I was like, this sounds great. I'm going to sign up to be a lifetime member. Maybe I'll go to some meetings sometime. Look at me now. So, you know, there is something about truth in advertising and giving people that, you know, shining that beacon of what are we for and who are we with. And, you know, we've talked about this many times. This always comes up here and there about, you know, what if we were going to add somebody who identified as a man to the board? You know, we certainly would be extremely open to any gender expression that somebody has being, you know, in our leadership space. And it's something that I think about a lot. You know, there's something to be said for a space that is explicitly for women, a space that is explicitly has Jewish in the name. That's also something that was extremely attractive to me. That's exactly what I was looking for, was a space to be a Jewish woman. So, you know, this isn't like a perfect answer, because I think that there could be a day that we have men on the board. And I think it's okay if we don't. I think that it's okay to have spaces that are who they're for. And it doesn't mean that we don't like men, but it just means that, you know, we're putting ourselves and you know, taking our own responsibility and accountability for holding that space. And I think that's really lovely too.
Thanks, Laura.
I would also just add, because there was a conversation at one point, because I had someone in mind about like, oh, if we were going to add, like during the nominating process, there was a man I had in mind that I thought would do really well on our board. And there was a conversation about it. I won't go into the details because those things are private, but what continued to come up is that there aren't, when you look at the landscape of boards at legacy national organizations, there still are a disproportionate number of men on the boards. And like there aren't as many opportunities for women on these boards for a variety of reasons. And so we still feel like it's not like we were struggling to find national board members. And so part of this is also an equity reason for right now. Like we want women on the national level to be able to represent us, and any of our board members who represent us as a 130-year-old organization with over 200,000 advocates, they also get to have power in their communities with their senators and with their members of Congress. And we want more women to have that. So I do, there are people I have in mind that I'd love one day to be seeing in a board level. I can also see us creating like a, you know, if you give above a certain level, there's a society or something, an advisory committee. So there were other ideas of ways to involve men, and we have been thinking a lot about how to get more men to give to NCJW. We do have some prominent donors who are male, but not nearly as many, disproportionately funded by women, which is amazing too. And so I think it'll come up again, but for right now, I also really appreciated that equity was a part of our response. Like we had, there's no shortage of amazing and talented women who are looking for national leadership opportunities. And so let's keep that coming. The other just diversity thing I want to name, because it didn't come up, that I feel comfortable saying out loud, because I thought it was just such a beautiful response to our board is obviously we're a historic organization, we're a legacy Jewish organization, we're also a historic white organization, white Jewish, white-led organization. And there was a moment that I think a lot of organizations were like, what does it mean that our board is predominantly white or all white, us included? And there are a lot of organizations around us that we saw just rapidly starting to add people of color to their boards, and we made a different decision as an organization. We now have people of color on our board, but we made a decision to go through a racial equity journey as a board and as a staff, and to do some learning and some unlearning, and to figure out what we needed to do to set things up differently in order to set people up for success, not tokenize, etc. And only after we went through that did we actually, I think, find the right people to join our board, who are also people of color. And when they joined, we didn't ask them to take on like the DEI work, unless, you know, obviously if somebody wants to, but we brought on people of color on our board for their talents, for their wisdom, for what they had to offer in the spaces and lanes where they can thrive. And I think it's actually been a really good experience. And like, as weird as it is, because we got a lot of pressure, you know, there was an article that was like naming historic organizations that had predominantly white people on their board. We were one of the organizations named. And I actually think the response from the board to be very thoughtful about how to go about, because as women, we know this. If you're on a board of all men and it's one woman, and because they wanted a woman there, there's a moment where that could be great because you know it and you want that opportunity. And there's a moment where you understand you're being tokenized and you actually don't have power and a voice. And so it's from using some of that, it's not exactly the same all the time, but using our experience, understanding things from a marginalized population, as people who have to navigate things like that, we went about it slightly differently. And I think the outcome right now is really positive from where we are. And I would imagine in the next nominating cycle, we'll see even more people of color, like women of color, wanting to join our board because they understand that, you know, we're here to try to bring together a diverse group of women to amplify their voices and give that power, not to tokenize people for a variety of reasons.
Thanks, Sheila. And thanks, Aziza, for your question here, just around board term limits. Do you want to take yourself off mute and expand on that, or just share a little bit more about that question?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for this. You're also reminding me about things that I forgot that our board were amazing on, especially in the aftermath that I've now blurred. So a question about term limits is more of what are they? We've resisted them. I mean, like as much as we possibly could because we felt like there was a really great treasure trove. The second part of the question, actually not related to that, but is like, I would love to just hear more about how you're making decisions and you described this flexibility in crisis, which is also where New Ground sits in our nimble spot, and it has its bumps. And so I'm just wondering if you could just describe that a little bit more.
And I just want to lift up Aziza. Thank you for being here. Aziza runs an organization called New Ground, which brings together Jews and Muslims in LA, I think, for dialogue and conversation and community building, and was actually just at an event last night, Aziza, where folks were just in your program and could not speak more highly about the recent retreat and conversations that you're leading. So thank you for that and for being here. Okay. Back to your question around term limits, Sheila or Laura.
Fabulous. Yeah, I'm curious as to why you've resisted term limits. It's like board governance is my my secret passion, not so secret passion. I tell everybody. I'm curious as to why you've resisted it. So we have three-year terms is what you are limited at. I've served on other boards where there have been similar limits, but then you can take off one term and come back. So that is something that I've seen be useful just to kind of ensure that there is some turnover and progression, but leaving the door open for great folks to come back on the board, I could see being really interesting. And then as far as, you know, making decisions fast, that's a great question. And this is something that, especially in these times when we are trying to make decisions fast, but still trying to make good decisions that are based on data and our mission aligned and all of that, it can be difficult. And this is something that our own board has gone through, especially as we're trying to, you know, provide immediate response where we can and be present where we can. And there are some conversations that have to happen very quickly because this is a time of urgency. I would say the best things that have helped us were updating our bylaws years ago to allow for electronic voting. That is something that has been very useful, and I'm sure many of you deploy already. And then we have a very active WhatsApp that we use for our board for casual communications. WhatsApp is a chat app, and it's nice because it doesn't matter what device you're on or what platform you use. You can use it on a desktop, you can use it on mobile. And it's a nice way to just connect with people, especially when there is something urgently happening. And that doesn't even mean because they might have to take a vote or do something directly. Sometimes it's just to be together, kind of, throw out a lifeline. That was one of the first places that I learned about October 7th was our board WhatsApp. People on the East Coast had started putting some messages in there, and I was like, wait, what am I missing? What's happening? And that was, it was important. That was like I said, that was the group that I really went to and that I took a lot of solace in. And having that kind of connection immediately was really important. And of course, the first question that any board member is asking is, well, what are we going to do? What's happening? How can we help? And Sheila's on our board WhatsApp. And so that's really useful because she's our connection and is able to jump in and say, okay, we're doing this and that. Jody's handling this. Rachel's planning this. We're going to be, signing on for that. We've got Smirty going over here. We've got all these things happening. And here are the 5 things that I need board members to be doing right now. So that is a very useful tool.
Yeah. And I think that because we know our board is also here for human connection, Laura always says like, happy birthday, so-and-so. There's just small touches that make it something that we use. And we get to, I think both us as a Jewish women's organization, this makes sense in many ways. Like when you come to our events, there's always, we think about like, what's the food we're having there? What's the experience? What's the space look like? And a lot of times that's really downplayed. And I like to celebrate those kinds of things as actual real examples of leadership. You want to make sure people are set up for success, that they can learn, that they can engage. And part of that is actually being in community and relationships. So we celebrate together, we mourn together, we show up for each other. And I think it's a really beautiful thing about being a part of this board. Like I would join this board if I wasn't the CEO of the organization. It's just like a lovely place to be. The other things I would add that help, one is we know our mission and we know our lane and we know what makes us the same and different. Like after October 7th, the first question that came up obviously was awful. We needed to name this as Jews. It bumped into one of these bigger than everything else moments. And we know we do different things in those moments. But also our lane on gender, what's the gender response, is what led in Franz here, who chairs like our Israel task force. One of the first things we did, we were the first organization to make a grant to the organization that helps people get breast milk, because we knew after women had been killed, there would be children who didn't have access to breast milk and they needed a surge of funding to be able to help navigate that scenario. Like that's the way we were thinking. What is it that we can do immediately that other people might not be thinking of doing? And how can we do this fast and effective? So we made a grant to that organization within, I think it was like 48 hours almost. We have some emergency granting in place, but we have that in place. We have the Jewish Fund for Abortion Access, so that just this week, we could help 15 families get IVF the way they needed to in Alabama, 15 Jewish families this time, because we have a fund for emergency response. Everything about doing women's organizations is an emergency and a crisis. So we like to be able to have flexibility in responding in crisis. So we think about what the crises could be in advance. Sometimes we know we could have never predicted October 7th, right? There are certain things you will never, ever know. But we were prepared for Roe being overturned. We were talking about it for 2 years leading up for it. We had a campaign ready. We had the email ready. And I hate saying it, we didn't want it to overturn, but anybody paying attention to the courts could see it was going in that direction. So as often as possible, we like to have the scenarios set. And then I think our board likes to have big conversations around issues we know that are coming up, even if we disagree. And when the filibuster came up as a deep issue. At the time, we had a real split in our board about whether we should, support or go against it for a variety of reasons. And instead of forcing the conversation in a fast way, we did like a slow drip educational experience. We had Amy Klobuchar join our board meeting and share why she once, had one position and it changed. And instead of trying to paint even the position that the staff, like me and Jody, our chief policy officer, thought we should land, what we did was give credibility to our board in presenting all of the perspectives. We brought people firmly for, we brought people firmly against, we brought organizations who supported, we brought organizations who didn't, and we said, we have an important decision to make. And our decision could be that we don't want to take a position. But I actually think in the moments where the going gets tough, we like to put everything on the table and allow ourselves the space to learn from each other and to know what feels right and wrong. And when we did ultimately take a position, I felt like the whole board was brought along, even if people had some moments where they might have disagreed a little. And that's for the people asking about polarization. I think like we're a nonpartisan organization. I think people love to call us progressive. And, it's not that I'm offended by the term, but I would remind everyone, why is it that we think fighting for women, children, and families fits as a progressive value? Why isn't fighting for childcare and IVF considered mainstream, and who makes those decisions? I think it's part of the patriarchy. But in these moments of tension, we just like to put it all out there and say, let's talk about it. And so even on October 7th and since, when we were deciding how much are we incorporating in, talking about Gaza, Palestinians, as an organization that's been critical of Netanyahu previously, maybe we're not saying that right now because it doesn't feel like the right thing in this tone, but when do we say it? Should we say it? These are all just things we just put out there. And because we have a diverse board, we actually get to hear what everybody thinks and come up with some conclusions together. So I think the board knows that the conversation isn't decided before they're engaging in it. And that has allowed for real fruitful conversation and for us to get where we need to be at the end of the day, with board members also being willing to compromise at certain points.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it any better. I love my just takeaway from that, Sheila and Laura. Thank you so much. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I thank you for coming back to that question around polarization and how do you navigate difference of opinion. What I just heard is you put everything out there, and it sounds like you've created a space on your board for difference of opinions, for different thoughts, for different beliefs. And that's really admirable. And I think boards can, in their best, be a place to share, a safe place to share everything and be comfortable in disagreement. Because I think that's a growing challenge for a lot of us. So I just want to thank you both, Sheila and Laura, and thank you all for being here. Our next board talk is May 10th with Stacey Aviva Flint of Jewish Federations of North America. She runs the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion program or initiative there. And then May 17th is with Gamal Palmer and Ana Lucia Lopez Reboredo from Jutina Eco. So really excited about that. Be in touch, show up, reach out to your CEO and board members, keep building community and building relationships. Someone said, impact moves at the speed of trust. So keep trusting in yourselves and others. Be safe and sound, and have a Shabbat Shalom and a restful weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.